Because my next guest is Jasmin Kaur, a poet from Canada. She's used her platform to address issues on mental health, feminism and sex in her new book, When You Ask Me Where I'm Going. So how easy is it then for Asian women to speak up against cultural taboos like getting pregnant before marriage? Is there still judgment or are attitudes changing? I want to hear from you on the programme this morning. So 81869 to text, or you can WhatsApp 07920 500 200. What are your thoughts, particularly about these issues, but also if you're a fan of Jasmin, if you have been following her work, what are your thoughts? Get your comments in, because she's here for the next 15, 20 minutes or so. Jasmin, how are you? Lovely to have you here.
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. It's good that you've been able to find time, when you're here from Canada over here in the UK to have a little chat to us. So, you're here anyway. Tell us a little bit about why you're here to talk to Sikh communities about your new book. What's it about then?
So I'm just here, very briefly, just to chat about When You Ask Me Where I'm Going. This is a collection of poetry, but it's also a collection of fiction and illustrations. And this book really has to do with everything that I've seen through my eyes as a Sikh woman, living in the Western world, whether that be the taboos that I face just for speaking up and being myself, or the racism that I experience in Canada, which is a lot more racist than people may perceive. Things related to mental health, my experiences related to, navigating all these different aspects of my identity that don't just fit into one little box.
So you've been writing for a while, though, haven't you, about all of this? Tell us a little bit about your journey and where this writing began.
Yeah. So when I first started thinking about poetry, I was not thinking about myself as the poet. I have always, loved spoken word. I've been an avid listener of poetry. So when I was 19, I was so in love with some of the poets that I'd heard on YouTube and spoken word artists that I wanted to host a poetry slam and open mic kind of event. And when I planned this thing, people were like, well, are you going to perform? And I was like, no, I don't really think that I am a writer in that sense, but I'd love to, share the work of other people and celebrate the voices that empower me. And I think that there was some point along the way of planning that event when I realized that I could actually challenge myself to write something. So just kind of accidentally, through thinking about other people's work, I was able to push myself out of my own kind of box and start writing. And again, I did not consider myself a writer at that time.
Jasmin, you can really write. Trust me about that. I'm reading, and some of the words, some of the way that you put together, put sentences and words together, literally makes words dance for me. I'm like, whoa, that's really powerful. And you do it so succinctly as well. So definitely well done there. What are some of the issues that you find that you need to talk about a lot? I know one of them which really stuck out to me was the fact that you're talking about being someone who's brown, being someone who is an immigrant, but also someone who is a native as well. What other things are coming out for yourself?
So I think that a lot of the political poetry in this book comes out of how I have experienced the world when people who don't understand my identity are making judgments about me. So for example, the fact that I tie this thought, even though I live in an area which is very densely populated by Sikhs and Punjabis, there's still a lot of stereotypes, whether that's coming externally from white folks who just don't understand, who we are, or whether it's coming from other South Asians who have, their own misconceptions about my identity. It's through this book, I really want to bring a voice to a lot of those experiences that, young Sikh women have, where they have a lot of perceptions made about them, but we don't always get to speak out and challenge them. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to do that in a very loud way. I wanted to talk about those things on a public platform. And I think that through this book, I want to bring those stories and those experiences of Sikh women to the forefront, where, we've been seen, but we haven't always been heard. And I think that every human being deserves to tell their own story. So that's what I'm doing with this book.
I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people nodding at home thinking, yes, actually, I want to be heard as well as being seen now as well. I want to talk a little bit more about those issues, and also want to talk about the writing process for yourself as well. But before we do that, why don't we hear from one of your actual poems that you've written in this book, When You Ask Me Where I'm Going? So Jasmin, tell us what poem you're going to read and why it's important.
So I'm going to read from page 38 of the book. This is a poem that actually inspired the title of the book. When I first started writing, I had a completely different title, and it wasn't something that I really liked, but I was okay with it. And my editor over at HarperCollins, she kind of challenged me to dig a little deeper. And it kind of hit me like overnight that this was the title of the book. So I'll go ahead and read. The next time you ask me where I'm going, please recall that I am 3 parts indecision and 1 part reckless abandon. That I have seldom bothered to look back at the wreckage I've left in my wake, and will never be bothered to master the flames at my fingertips anyways. I am not your poem. I was never your brushstroke. I am not your tragedy or your failed attempts to find meaning. I was never an answer to a question. So when you ask me like Dawn if I will rise to your occasion, do not be disappointed when I reply with the dusk that is all I've ever known.
Thank you so much for that, Jasmin. Jasmin Kaur there, reading the eponymous poem from her book, When You Ask Me Where I'm Going. What inspired that then? What was this about? What does this say to you? Where did this come from?
I think that living in this body of mine, as a Sikh woman, as a Punjabi woman, as a Dastard-tying woman, people have tons of different ideas about you, whether it's, how you're supposed to carry yourself, the idea that you should be, graceful and fit into somebody else's perception of modesty, the idea that, according to some white folks, that you are oppressed because of your identity. I think just grappling with all those different external perceptions made me want to kind of just stop and say, I don't need to fit into your boxes. Or your ideas of how free I am or how what empowers me. I'm going to kind of craft those spaces myself. And just like other Sikh women, we're going to figure out who we are on our own terms. And we don't need to fit into your perceptions of what is a god. Those are concepts that we are navigating through our experiences with our own souls and our own minds and bodies. And they don't need to fit into your ideas.
And that's a theme that you keep coming back to throughout this book as well, whether it's with, other people, other races, other backgrounds, but also with men as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think that a lot of the times, because we live in a world that is very heavily dominated by male perceptions, and we live in a patriarchal world, a lot of our perceptions of women are dictated by the way that men perceive us, whether that is, the perceived goodness of a woman or, what is empowering to a woman. I want to define those things for myself and not let somebody else put those labels on me. There's one poem where I really talk about the idea that a woman is seen as a burden, or she's seen as like a nuisance, or the cause for a man's upset because she speaks her mind. And women are often socialized to think that if you're a little bit too loud, or you're just a little bit too forceful about your opinion, that just makes you a terrible person or something like that.
Troublemaker.
Yeah, you're a troublemaker. But conversely, if a man were to say the same things, he would just be a change maker or something like that. So a lot of my work has to do with
he's
undoing
just young,
perceptions.
even though he's 40.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just like taking up space and rethinking how I think of myself as a woman, and not backing down when I say something.
Where did that come from?
Like it.
Where did that come, or has that always been there?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I think that came before I started writing, definitely. I think just being a woman, not just in like a South Asian family, but just a woman in this world, or a girl in this world, you're often going to be kind of knocked down a little bit, and told where your place is, where you are best fit, all these sorts of things. And I've never been the kind of person where I enjoy that, or I'm willing to kind of accept that. So I think that kind of willingness to be a little bit of a rebel, or to, speak my mind, came from tons of different times when I was told no, or I was told, where I should be. and just not liking that.
So past experiences have informed that attitude for you. I mean, is that something that is for everyone? Would you stand up to everyone, even those perhaps closest to you, maybe people within, the Sikh community as well?
I would say so. I think that patriarchy has a way of embedding itself everywhere. No space is naturally free from it unless we actively challenge it. And I know that, like, as a Sikh, I find so much, liberation, empowerment. But sometimes cultural norms, which are outside of my Sikh values or outside of our collective Sikh values, kind of embed themselves into community. So I think that's what I challenge. Those things that get into the minds of, like, our brothers and sisters, that teach us to, push other people into a box of, like, what they think is acceptable.
How have people reacted to you being like this?
I think for the most part, there's always going to be those people who see someone who is different than them and they're like, no, that's not allowed.
Yeah, she's too much hard work is something that
so
I imagine will be said.
So I have an Instagram account, and for the most part, I create that space for girls. I create that space for women, because we don't have a ton of spaces just for ourselves. But, there's occasionally always that guy that will walk in and be like, I don't like what you're doing. Just leave you a bunch of comments just to make you feel bad about yourself, thinking that that's the only power he has over you. So it's things like that where I'll see, me just speaking my mind and someone being so upset about an idea that I have that they will take time out of their day to just try to, like, knock me down or scare me a little bit to not be on social media. And I think that's a problem that, like, a lot of, like, young Sikh women are facing on social media. They express themselves. They are who they are, and someone doesn't like that, so they think that they're going to come onto their Instagram or Twitter or whatever account they have and kind of just leave nasty comments just to get them out of that space. And I think that by continuing to be in those spaces, by continuing to write poetry, express myself, be visible, and be who I am, you kind of say no to those people. You take power away from them, or you take back the power that they're trying to take from you when they try to get rid of you through, their words or their online bullying and things like that.
Okay, so is it simply in the online social media space that you want this to be? I mean, clearly with this book out now, you want it to be in a physical space as well. But what about in places like in community centres, in gurdwaras, in people's families and homes? Is that something that we're working up towards, do you think?
I think that through writing, you can kind of infect minds in so many different ways. I chose Instagram originally because I love the idea that I can just, have an idea and I don't need to have it filtered through 1,000 different lenses. I can just share my ideas out loud and it will reach someone that needs it. And then I think that somewhere along that journey of, like, being in love with Instagram, I also realized that there is value in being able to hold my work in my hands and to be able to kind of reach people in, like, physical spaces as well. I grew up, like, being an avid reader. I would, go to the bookstore when I go to the mall and not want to go anywhere else when I was a kid. I would have a book in my hand when I went to the grocery store with my parents. So the idea now that I can go into a bookstore and find, Rupi Kaur's work and see her name as, like, another Kaur, another Sikh woman. I can, see my work there and hopefully so many more. That's amazing to me. The idea that, like, now we can occupy physical spaces, and I think that all human beings deserve that. There are not a ton of, Sikh women in the publishing industry right now.
But I hope, the likes of yourself, and as you mentioned, Rupi as well, are changing that.
Absolutely.
Can we talk a little bit about the Punjabi community in Canada? Because obviously that's where you're from as well. Is it becoming more open when it comes to talking about issues like sex, alcohol as well, mental health?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that I've always, like, believed that colonization has, like, a huge impact on how our community is able to, like, navigate things. One, due to, like, the trauma that our people experience, but two, like, due that I feel like colonization affects the way we perceive ourselves, the way we, like, talk about issues of sex, mental health and all those sorts of things. So a lot of it is undoing or decolonizing what colonialism has done to, like, our collective psyches. I think that for me, it's always been really important to have very frank and open conversations about things that make people uncomfortable. For example, sex. Some people find it overwhelming that a Sikh woman is able to have these conversations in public spaces. And I think that's exactly why we need to have these conversations, so that we can lose those taboos that could result in people, or young girls especially, to being taken advantage of, or, not having information about their own bodies because they are worried about asking a question that they've been socialized to think is not acceptable, and therefore they're kind of struggling alone and trying to figure things out by themselves.
Thanks very much for saying that and expressing that, because I'm sure a lot of what you're saying, people will be listening at home and thinking, yeah, I understand what she's saying here. Who is this book then aimed at? Who is this book for? Is it to create that space for young Sikh women, young Sikh girls to actually be able to express themselves? Is it for, Punjabi men, the external community, to actually be educated and learn about Sikh women? Who's the audience?
Sure. So I've always described my work as a serenade to gods in a public space. And by that, I mean that when I'm writing, I dedicate my work to other Sikh women because we don't really have a lot of spaces to ourselves. However, as I am sharing those words, they can resonate with anyone else that's listening, that's standing around there. So this book is for everyone. When I'm speaking, when I'm writing, I'm thinking about those girls that don't always, have their stories told. But I think that there's so much learning that everyone can gain when you hear someone else's experience or see the world through someone else's eyes for a minute.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you on the programme today, Jasmin. So this book then, it's called When You Ask Me Where I'm Going. Like I said, a collection of prose and poetry, stories, anecdotes as well. When is it going to be available for people to pick up and check it out?
So we're releasing on October 1st. So super excited for the fall. And in the UK, we're not in bookstores yet, but you can order on Amazon UK. You can pre-order now, actually. And then the book should reach you on the release date. Excellent. And we've only got about a minute or so, but very quickly, for anyone listening out there, what one bit of advice would you give them if they want to get into writing? I would say to find your own voice. I think that knowing who you are as a writer is so important, especially when people kind of have this idea of needing to fit in or be like everybody else to be marketable. The power of your work is in your own voice. So figure out who you are first and then channel that into your work. Jasmin, thank you so much for your time. Jasmin Kaur there.